Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.
Good news and bad news in all statistics. What's the good news and bad news in Gers today?
Well, for me, the good news is that Scotland's economy is growing. We've reached record levels of revenue. Scotland's economy, in terms of onshore resources, revenues is growing faster than the rest of the UK. The estimated notional deficit as part of the current constitutional arrangements, that notional deficit is reducing faster than the rest of the UK, and Scotland's economy is strong, and that's to be welcomed.
What bad news is there then that people need to be aware of or that you're looking to correct in future?
Well, look, I think these figures speak to the fact that Scotland would be a more successful country if we were independent, if we were able to make the same kind of decisions as small advanced economies around the world. I think we'd be more prosperous and have a fairer country as well. We can continue to grow our resources, grow our revenues, and therefore tackle the endemic
Obviously today we're looking back a wee bit, and looking back on the 2014 campaign, how do you feel it went and how do you feel Scotland has changed as a result?
Well, I think what you've seen is that young people in particular were really energised in that campaign, not just in 2014, but that's reflected in the turnout that we've had from young people today. This is unfinished business. And I think perhaps more importantly, the risks that we face today are huge. Risks have been taken out of the European Union. The rights that we have as EU citizens that we're going to be denied if Boris Johnson gets his way. The threats that there are to our economy, the potential loss of 100,000 jobs in Scotland. So I think it is absolutely now crystal clear that independence offers us the opportunity to protect Scotland's economic interests, not just economically but socially and culturally. That need, that desire for independence is ever stronger than perhaps it was in 2014. So there's an obligation that we've got to give leadership to that campaign. That's what Nicola Sturgeon as our First Minister has been doing. We know that we have to send a very strong message to Westminster in any election that comes over the coming weeks, that it's the people of Scotland that must determine their own future. It will be the people of Scotland that will do that, not Boris Johnson, and that's why we need to make sure in the election campaign we send as many SNP MPs to Westminster as possible. That will unlock the door on a Section 30, and then let's begin that debate as to what Scotland's future should be. Let's have a debate about the vision and values that we all have. How do we deliver a fairer Scotland? How do we deal with the inequality? How do we deal with the poverty? How do we make sure that we deliver sustainable economic growth, but at the same time take our climate change responsibilities as well? There is a bright and there's a better future for Scotland if we grasp the opportunity, and if I may say so, we complete the journey that Scotland started to independence when our Parliament came back in 1999. Now is the time for the people of Scotland to recognise that our Parliament has delivered. We've got a Parliament that's focused on the day job, and that's in sharp contrast to the chaos of Westminster.
So, what would you say are the biggest changes that you've seen in the independence movement over that time, including, I guess, what message the independence movement is putting out?
I think we've got to be reflective, and I think we've got to understand the opinions of everybody. We've got to reach out in a spirit of friendship. It has to be one where we listen to what people have to say. There have been many, many people that have gone on a journey over the course of the last few years from no to yes. We must encourage them to do so. Many of them are doing that at their own pace, and we should respect that. But it's one where we need to have respectful debate, where we can have that honest and open dialogue about how we do deliver that fairer Scotland. I think it is the case in 2014 that a number of people were perhaps frightened. They weren't quite ready to finish that journey. Let's make sure that we give them the time, the space, the opportunity, and crucially, the encouragement that they can do that and they can come with us.
And as we look forward, what would you say are the main things that independence supporters should be thinking about doing now?
Well, I think what we've got to do is build the momentum which is there. I mean, the polls have shown that there's increasing support for independence, not just support for independence, but people want that referendum. So we need to get out and we need to talk to people on the doorsteps, town by town, community by community. Let's make sure that we're building that support for independence, that momentum grows and this becomes unstoppable.
Iain Blackford, thanks very much.
Good morning. Our first item this morning is general questions. Question number 1, Tom Arthur.
To ask the Scottish Government how it will support St Andrew's Day's events this year.
Minister Ben Macpherson.
Presiding Officer, modern Scotland's sense of national identity is proudly and passionately inclusive, diverse, compassionate, open and outward-looking, as emphasised by the Scottish Government's We Are Scotland campaign. Reflecting those values, the Scottish Government supports a range of initiatives on and around St Andrew's Day, including funding and supporting with partners the Scotland's Winter Festivals Event Fund, administered by Visit Scotland Events Directorate, Bemis Scotland's Multicultural Events Programme, and Scotland's participation in the global Fair Saturday movement in order to develop unique and distinctive events in Scotland to celebrate Scotland's national identity in both an inclusive manner and an internationalist spirit.
Tom Arthur.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer and also thank him for meeting with the cross-party group on St Andrew's Day earlier this year, which I convened. And can I ask the Minister if he will join me in commending the work of All About Barrhead's Business Improvement District, who are organising a festive fair to take place in Barrhead on St Andrew's Day, which will highlight the ethos of Fair Saturday and feature Scottish entertainment to celebrate St Andrew's Day as part of their Offie Scottish Winter Wonderland event. And will he also join me in thanking the entire All About Barrhead team and in particular their manager Andy Dunlop for the excellent series of cultural events that they organise in the town throughout the year.
Minister Ben Macpherson.
First of all, commend Tom Arthur and the whole cross-party group on St Andrew's Day and thank them for their engagement and their work. And I'm also delighted to commend the work of All About Barrhead in terms of their planning for St Andrew's Day and what they do all through the year. And thank the whole team at All About Barrhead. To fully harness the significant potential that events can provide, other partners across Scotland, whether that's local authorities or other bodies, community and business organisations such as All About Barrhead are always encouraged to support and help deliver their own activity to join in the celebration of Scotland's winter festivals, and in this instance St Andrew's Day. And I'd particularly like to thank and commend the team at All About Barrhead for engaging this year in the Fair Saturday movement. The Fair Saturday movement is a global movement that encourages communities to follow the consumerism of Black Friday with a response through cultural activity on Fair Saturday that is in support of social causes and in a spirit of social empathy. This year, Fair Saturday falls on St Andrew's Day itself, the 30th of November, and I encourage as many communities across Scotland to sign up to hosting a St Andrew's Fair Saturday event by visiting at standrewsfairsaturday.org, just as All About Barrhead have commendably done.
Thank you. And call question 2, Iain Gray.
To ask the Scottish Government what progress has been made with the planned improvements to the Sheriffhall roundabout on the A720.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
The Scottish Government remains committed to undertaking improvements at Sheriffhall roundabout. Transport Scotland continue to progress detailed development and assessment of the preferred option for the grade separation of the roundabout, with a view to publishing draft orders later this year for formal comment. As part of the essential preparatory work, Transport Scotland have undertaken ground investigation and environmental survey work, with the output informing the design of the scheme. In addition to this, extensive consultation with active travel stakeholders has been undertaken to ensure the proposed improvements include suitable provision for all users, including cyclists.
Iain Gray.
Well, these improvements have been promised for years now, and for commuters from my constituency, it sometimes seems like they've spent those years waiting in a queue at the Sheriffhall roundabout. Could the Minister please give us a date when this work's going to start?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Presiding Officer, the member will be aware this was a commitment which was provided within the City Region deal for the Edinburgh and East of Scotland, which was agreed back in 2017, and progress has been made during that time frame. As it stands at the present moment, the development and assessment work on the preferred option has been taken forward by Transport Scotland. It's difficult to give a specific date because the draft orders, once they are issued, allow individuals to comment on the matter, which could then trigger potentially a public local inquiry, which could all have an impact on the time frame. But I can give the member an assurance that we are committed to taking this project forward, and I wish to see the project moving quickly as it can. However, there are certain issues that could have an impact on what the finalised timescale is for the project being completed.
Question number 3, Graham Simpson.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on its plans to improve the Glasgow-East Kilbride train line.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
Following extra seating capacity in May, the first physical works to inform proposals for future investment on the Glasgow-East Kilbride line corridor will commence this month. Key site and geological investigations will be undertaken following tree and vegetation clearance by Network Rail along the 11-mile route corridor. The outcome will help to determine the right long-term solution on the route and will focus on providing enhanced connectivity, better transport integration with improved park and ride facilities. Our aim, whilst delivering this, is to move towards a carbon-free journey by progressing the option of efficient electrification.
Graham Simpson.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. He mentioned in the answer improved park and ride facilities. That could, of course, happen if we get a new station for Hairmyres moving the site of the existing one. Could he give us a potential timeline on when we may see work or at least a decision being taken on that?
Cabinet Secretary.
I'm aware, Presiding Officer, of the request for additional parking at the Hairmyres station, and it's one of the issues which will be a principal part of the focus of the project to enhance the Glasgow-East Kilbride line. I'm aware that Network Rail, along with Transport Scotland, have been working with South Lanarkshire Council and also with SPT on this very issue, and they are looking to try and make progress on plans for enhanced provision at Hairmyres. So this will all be part of the wider package of measures in order to look at improving services and connectivity on the line, and that's why we've provided Network Rail with some almost £25 million to start this work in order to come to a finalised plan on what the enhancements should be in the next couple of years.
Question number 4, Dean Lockhart.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the FSB Scotland report, Transforming Towns, Delivering a Sustainable Future for Local Places.
Minister Kate Forbes.
I have read and I welcome the FSB's report and their ideas and ambitions for our town centres. We're committed to supporting our town centres to be more diverse, successful and sustainable. And officials are meeting with FSB in October, along with the Scotland's Towns Partnership, to discuss the report in more detail.
Dean Lockhart.
Despite what the Minister has just outlined, according to a PwC report, more than 5 shops a week closed in Scotland's high streets in the first 6 months of the year, with increasing business rates cited as one of the main reasons. There are now over 22,000 firms across Scotland that are subjected to the large business supplement, pushing many of them close to bankruptcy. When will the Minister listen to leading organisations across Scotland and scrap the financially crippling large business supplement?
Minister.
Well, I thank the member for that question, and he'll know that the large business supplement is an issue of discussion at every budget, and I warmly welcome his engagement with this year's budget. The report he mentioned from the FSB also highlighted that over half of FSB's premises-based members pay no business rates, because we are committed to supporting the high street and ensuring that over 100,000 small businesses are lifted out of rates altogether.
Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Minister agree with me that the FSB report on transforming towns provides a positive outlook for the Scottish economy, in particular for areas like Kippen, which features in the report's list of top 20 towns for self-employment rate, as well as the fact that Stirling's vacancy for non-domestic premises is well below the national average? Minister, is it not the case that this demonstrates that not only is the Stirling area open for business, but with the City Region deal, as well as the Scottish Government's small business bonus scheme, Stirling is the place to do business?
Minister.
Well, I certainly agree that Stirling is one of the places to do business, and I won't mention that some of the towns at the top of that list are in the Highlands, because that would be for another day. But we certainly understand that businesses face challenges and huge opportunities in our evolving town centres, and that's why we have provided the £50 million Town Centre Fund to stimulate growth and investments, and to back the businesses that are doing well already in our town centres. And we'll continue to back small businesses through our Town Centre Action Plan.
Question number 5, Mark Ruskell.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what discussions it has had with the operators of the ethylene plant at Mossmorran regarding the climate emergency and the need for a just transition.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
I met representatives of ExxonMobil on the 12th of September 2019 to discuss their £140 million investment through 2019 and 2020, which will significantly improve the site's efficiency, sustainability and environmental performance. The investment will support employment opportunities, and by implementing necessary infrastructure improvements, it will also help support the transition towards a net zero emissions economy in a way that is consistent with a just transition. We expect that alongside reducing greenhouse gas emissions, this investment will help address key issues identified by SEPA and the local community by lowering the frequency and impact of flaring, as well as associated issues such as noise pollution.
Mark Ruskell.
Can I thank the Minister for that response and welcome the £140 million that was announced by the operators this week. They were forced into that by the regulatory and political pressure that has been exerted on the company over the last few years. But not a penny of that investment will enable us to meet the net zero climate target that is currently in the Climate Change Bill. So will the Scottish Government back a Green New Deal for Fife and an industrial strategy for Fife that can help to plan investment and jobs in clean industries and technologies that have a genuine future?
Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Certainly, Mr Ruskell raises important points. I would highlight the fact the programme for government, which has been announced in the last fortnight, points out a number of measures which will benefit the Fife economy in terms of support for industrial development and also for decarbonising the economy. I would say that in relation to the point he makes around the investment that's being made by ExxonMobil, I've had assurances, as I outlined in my original answer, that a considerable part of the investment will go to improving the efficiency of the plant, its energy efficiency, reducing greenhouse gas emissions from flaring, and obviously improve air quality in and around the area that's served by the plant. So therefore, I do believe that there is significant progress being made there, but we obviously note the point that we're working together as a Parliament to deliver a net zero emissions economy, and I look forward to working with Mr Ruskell on that.
Annabel Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Would the Minister agree with me that Exxon's welcome announcement this week of the £140 million investment in the plant with 850 jobs attached is an illustration of what determined communities can achieve in ensuring that their voices are heard? And will the Minister confirm that robust scrutiny and monitoring of the plant will continue apace?
Minister.
Thank you. Certainly, I recognise the point. The investment announcement is indeed very welcome, and I pay tribute to the role that Annabel Ewing and other campaigners have played in representing the concerns of the local community. The recent variations to the permits of both operators at Mossmorran will mean there is a clear timetable and detailed plans for implementing improvements to flaring, and these actions should improve compliance and drive further investments to better protect local communities. SEPA has a range of enforcement powers available to it. I understand the air quality monitoring equipment will remain in force and will be used throughout this process, and my hope is that they will not be required to use their enforcement powers, and ExxonMobil will move swiftly to implement the promised improvements.
Question number 6, Richard Lyle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how much compensation has been paid out to residents by the M8, M73, M74 motorway improvements project, including for noise pollution and house damage.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
Approximately £10.75 million has been paid in compensation for the acquisition of land on the M8, M73, M74 motorway improvements project to date. Additionally, a number of Part 1 claims for the depreciation of value to property through the use of the works have been received. I can confirm that these are under active consideration by the District Valuer and that formal negotiations are expected to commence shortly.
Richard Lyle.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer? The Cabinet Secretary will be acutely aware of the many questions which I have asked both in this chamber and out with on behalf of my local constituents regarding the M8, M73, M74 improvement programme. I therefore asked, how soon can we get a fuller picture on whether my constituents will receive other compensation for their inconvenience, and how will that information be communicated to them?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I've confirmed, the Part 1 claims have been received and are currently under active consideration by the District Valuer. This includes consideration of the part scheme noise readings against the predicted noise levels, reviewing nearby sales information and undertaking a number of external inspections. And I would anticipate that the initial SIF will be completed shortly and that formal negotiations will then commence directly with the members' constituents or their appointed agents thereafter.
Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Much of the congestion that remains around the M8 is at Glasgow Airport, and the improvement project did very little to address that. The Cabinet Secretary might be aware of the efforts of the cross-party efforts of the A737 Action Group, which are hoping to reduce some of the fatalities on this road which feed into the M8 at the Glasgow Airport. Is he aware of this campaign, and can he update us on what action the Government is taking to address their concerns on that road?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I am aware of the campaign, and as the member will be aware that we are actively looking at a range of potential options to help to address congestion around the M8, particularly around the Glasgow Airport area. One of the commitments we set out in the programme for government is to look at how we could use greater provision of public transport to help to reduce congestion in these areas, including the possibility of repurposing parts of the motorway network around Glasgow to help to address some of these issues by reducing cars on the M8 in itself. So there's a range of different measures that we are committed to taking forward to reduce congestion, including the repurposing of parts of the motorway for public transport.
Question number 7, Donald Cameron.
To ask the Scottish Government what action it is taking to ensure that vessels operating on the Clyde and Hebrides ferry service are robust and reliable.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Under the terms of the CHFS2 contract, CalMac, as the operator, are required to keep the vessels seaworthy and in a good and efficient state of repair. This is done during the annual vessel overhaul of the Clyde and Hebrides ferry services fleet, and this includes maintaining the classification of the vessels with the relevant classification society, as well as complying with all other regulations and requirements, statutory or otherwise. In August 2018, the Scottish Government announced the creation of a £3.5 million resilience fund for the CalMac fleet during 2018-19, with a further £4 million allocated in the 2019-20 budget.
Donald Cameron.
The Minister may be aware that a ferry summit took place on Islay on Monday, chaired by his colleague Mike Ruskell and attended by a wide variety of organisations and individuals, including myself. All parties there present agreed a set of proposals which will shortly be published in the local paper, the Ilioch. Will the Minister commit to working with the public bodies who developed these proposals so that Isla benefits as soon as possible from a ferry service with enhanced capacity?
Minister.
Well, I certainly welcome the positive remarks that Mr Cameron is making. Clearly, we are, our officials participated in the summit and will be feeding back to me their thoughts on what can be taken forward. But I'm happy the summit took place and that there was obviously a very constructive discussion around improvements that are needed to meet the growing needs of the Isla economy with the growth in distilling activity in the island as well. We're conscious, of course, that there are also commercial plans for investment in ferry services to Isla, but I commit to work with the member and others around this chamber to ensure that we get the right balance and supply of ferries to meet the needs of the community in Isla going forward. And of course the member will be aware that we're taking forward the start of our new ferries plan to go beyond 2022 and also updating the vessel replacement deployment plan to take on board the issues he's raised.
Question number 8, Tom Mason.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government for an update into the progress of the Robertson Review into the regulation of legal services.
Minister Ashton.
The Scottish Government formally responded to the Robertson Review in June 2019, and that response set out that we will seek to build consensus as to the way forward with regard to the future of the regulatory framework prior to taking forward legislative change. We are currently working with the Law Society of Scotland, the Faculty of Advocates, in order to build that consensus. We committed in the Programme for Government, which was published on the 3rd of September 2019, to launch a consultation on reforming our legal services in early 2020.
Tom Mason.
I thank the Minister for that answer. A number of my constituents have raised serious concerns with some existing practices within the Scottish Legal Complaints Commission, particularly around transparency of investigations and the lack of all representation during proceedings, as well as a lack of available appeal mechanisms. They believe that this may be in breach of their human rights. What assurances can the Minister give that this review will look at these vitally important issues in a timely manner?
Minister.
I thank the member for raising those what are quite important issues. And we do recognise that whilst the complaint system is integral, the Law Society of Scotland and others sought a review to consider the wider implications rather than just the complaint system. So my view is that there should be a joined-up, forward-looking regulatory framework of legal services in Scotland, and as such the system should be reformed through one piece of legislation rather than being done in a piecemeal fashion.
Thank you very much, and that concludes general questions. Now, before we turn to First Minister's questions, I know that members would like to join me in welcoming to our gallery from Ireland the Comcurley of the Dáil Éireann, Seán Fergal. And could I also invite members to join me in welcoming His Excellency Ambassador Adil Baizalov, Ambassador of the Kyrgyz Republic. And one further item before turning to the first question. I'm sure that members will be aware and will share my disappointment that significant details of this afternoon's statement on getting it right for every child on the named persons legislation have been leaked to the media in advance of this afternoon's announcement. My understanding is that the government is investigating this matter, but as members know, announcements on major policies should not enter the public domain before they are communicated to this Parliament. And I would urge the Government to have regard to this guidance on announcements, and I expect it to be adhered to. Question number 1, Jackson Carlow.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I will now try artfully to dance around that comment that you've just made. The SNP's named person policy, which would allow public authorities to share confidential information about children in Scotland without either the child or young person or her parent being aware, has been utterly discredited. Last month, even the expert panel set up by the Scottish Government to try and make sense of this declared they couldn't. First Minister, they were right, weren't they?
First Minister.
Well, the Deputy First Minister will make a statement on this later this afternoon. I will not preempt the detail of that statement, but I will I will make some general comments about the direction of travel. The Deputy First Minister's statement will do three things in general terms. Firstly, it will set out the Government's response to the GIRFEC Practice Development Panel's report. That report will be published this afternoon. Secondly, he will set out the implications for the statutory underpinning of the named person policy. And thirdly, he will set out how we intend to support and indeed seek to improve current GIRFEC practice, particularly around the important issue of information sharing. Lastly, Presiding Officer, let me be clear though that young people across Scotland already benefit from a named point of contact. That is usually a health visitor or a promoted teacher. We want that to continue, and we want to ensure that councils and indeed practitioners are well supported with the right guidance to help them fulfil their roles effectively. So that's the general thrust of what the Deputy First Minister will outline this afternoon. I hope I haven't breached any conventions in giving the Chamber that information. The Deputy First Minister will obviously go into more detail of that and answer questions about that detail.
Jackson Carlo.
Well, of course, if the statement had been made yesterday, there would be no question of preempting anything, and we would all be properly briefed to ask the First Minister about it today. And let's recall what the First Minister's expert panel said. They were asked by John Swinney, the Deputy First Minister, to write a code of practice that would ensure the SNP's named person policy would not break the law. We were reassured by Mr Swinney that this was entirely possible. And anyone who doubted it, anyone at all, was scaremongering. Yet in the view of that panel of experts, it was concluded that a code was, and I quote, not the right thing to do at this time, and that it would not be desirable. Along with many others, we warned parts of the SNP, parts of this policy, we warned the SNP this would be the outcome when the courts ruled that parts of this policy were unlawful. Why didn't they listen then?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, Presiding Officer, in terms of yesterday's parliamentary business, there was Tory opposition business yesterday afternoon, and I suspect, had we chosen to constrain that yesterday, Jackson Carlo might have had something to say about that. But we have taken time, and can I remind the Chamber and everybody in the Chamber, because I think this will be the issue people watching at home have in mind. What we are talking about here are issues of child protection. And all of us want to make sure that we have the systems in place in this country that give children, particularly children living in vulnerable circumstances, the greatest protection that it is possible to give them. We often, when we are reflecting on, in this chamber and outside this chamber, tragic incidents that affect children, that sometimes lead to the loss of a child's life, often one of the things we reflect on was the inability of different professionals to share the information about the life and the circumstances of that child. So we have, in good faith, been looking at how we try to improve those situations and make sure that all children have a system in place that has their best interests at heart. We have listened to the views of experts. That's why we established the Practice Development Panel to look in detail at what is a complex issue. One of the things that has changed while it's been doing its work, obviously, is data protection law itself, which, as all of us know, has undergone significant change. So we will set out a considered response to that this afternoon. We will set out the implications for the statutory underpinning of that policy. But most importantly of all, and I would hope that this is what all members would engage in, we will also set out the further steps we will take to make sure those working on the front line, doing the job of protecting our children, have the best guidance and the best policy framework to do that. Because I believe that's one of the most important responsibilities I have as First Minister, and indeed I believe it's one of the most important responsibilities this Parliament has to children across our country.
Jackson Carlo.
Can I just reassure the First Minister, Conservatives are always willing to revise our business to hold this government to account. And despite all the First Minister now says, the one thing this government hasn't been doing is listening. Everybody, from teachers to social workers and most crucially of all parents, have made their case against it patiently and calming. And rather than listening, the response of ministers has been to stick their fingers in their ears. They've refused to budge. And as a result, the ordinary taxpayer has been left with a staggering legal bill of £800,000, and teachers and parents have been left, as usual, in the dark. Can the First Minister honestly say, when she looks back at the 6 long years since this policy was first announced, that she and her deputies stand by their handling of this fiasco?
First Minister.
Jackson Carlaw is able to hold this government to account. He's rightly able to do that right now. Members will be able to do it when the Deputy First Minister issues a statement later this afternoon. Of course, nobody is able to hold the Tory government in Westminster to account right now because Parliament is suspended. Can I remind Jackson Carlaw that the 2014 Act was passed by this Parliament. All along we have listened to and responded to concerns. We also, as was expected of us, took the time to consider carefully the court judgment around information sharing. That's indeed why the panel was asked to do its work, and we've considered carefully the views of the panel. And all of that will lead to the statement that John Swinney will make this afternoon. And I come back to the central point here. I absolutely accept there have been differences of opinion on this. I absolutely accept that members like Jackson Carlaw or any member of this Parliament has every right to ask detailed and searching questions of the government about this policy or any other policy. What I do think, though, is regrettable is the tone of some of this, because all of us want to do our level best to protect children, particularly vulnerable children, as much as possible. And everything the government does around this is done in good faith, and that will continue to be the case. So, as well as setting out the response to the panel and the implications for the legislation, some of what is most important in what John Swinney will say is the ongoing work to make sure that practitioners trying to protect children are as well supported as possible. And I would hope all members would of course not give up scrutinising the government, but get behind the motivation and the objectives that we're seeking to fulfil.
Jackson Carlaw.
It's precisely because we wanted to do our best by vulnerable children that Scottish Conservatives looked to a massive increase in the number of health visitors that we had. Health visitors who would be concentrating on vulnerable children and not reporting on their parents. Presiding Officer, more than 3 years ago, the Scottish Conservatives held a debate in this Parliament calling for a pause on the introduction of the named person policy. A pause which might have allowed some common sense from this government to emerge, which might have spared the government and the taxpayer all the needless waste and cost that's followed. Instead, they hurled abuse at those of us who stood against it. They charged on regardless. They were warned countless times. We told them when this policy was introduced. We told them again when it was clear it wasn't going to work. And we tell them again today. For once, listen to teachers and listen to parents. Dump this policy and dump it now.
First Minister.
Well, I think Jackson Carlaw's tone is regrettable here, although the detail of this is extremely important. This government is increasing the number of health visitors. We're investing massively in perinatal mental health support, for example, increasing mental health counsellors in our schools. Doing everything we can to protect vulnerable children from the impact of austerity and cuts to welfare that are being imposed by Jackson Carlaw's party. So we are doing a range of things to make sure that we are supporting and protecting vulnerable children in every way that we can. And we will continue to do that. These are complex issues. These are, by their very nature, sensitive issues and often controversial issues. There are rarely easy answers. So we will continue to take the right steps. We will continue to listen to experts, and we will continue to set out plans that sees this government, and I hope this Parliament, fulfil its obligation to those who work in the front line with children who are at risk, and indeed any child living in vulnerable circumstances. And the Deputy First Minister will set out more detail of that when he stands up this afternoon.
Question number 2, Richard Leonard.
Presiding Officer, this morning, Audit Scotland has delivered a damning verdict on the state of university finance under this government's watch. University funding has been cut by more than 11% over the past 5 years. As a result, more than half of our universities are now in deficit. We used to be proud of the international reputation of our universities, but the European Universities Association calls Scottish higher education, and I quote them, a declining system under pressure. Universities Scotland say, and I quote them, government funding for universities is decreasing at a faster rate than the Scottish Government's budget, suggesting university funding has been deprioritised. Can the First Minister explain why our universities have been deprioritised by her government?
First Minister.
Well, I don't know about Richard Leonard, but I am still proud of the international reputation of Scottish universities. And whenever I meet people from other countries or travel overseas, including yesterday in Germany, I meet people who are envious of the reputation and the record and the performance of Scottish universities. In terms of the Audit Scotland report today, I would firstly point to the fact that in this financial year, resources to universities, the higher education budget has increased. The report also sets out that the total income in the sector has increased over the past few years. Of course, resources are tight. I may be mistaken in this recollection, but I don't recall Richard Leonard requesting additional money for universities in the recent budget. He'll correct me if I am wrong, but our universities are performing strongly. We have more top 200 universities per head of our population than any other country bar Switzerland. We're setting repeated records for students going to university from Scotland, and we see more people going to university from the poorest background. We've had massive progress in widening access. And of course, I'm sure Richard Leonard knows this because he will have read the Audit Scotland report in full, that while yes, it points to constraints in Scottish Government funding, some of the biggest funding challenges that it sets out for universities come from policies from the UK Government. Pension costs, the Augur review of tuition fees, and of course Brexit, which the report says threatens £211 million of funding from Scotland's universities. I don't know if Richard Leonard has anything to say about any of that.
Richard Leonard.
Well, I've not only read the report, I've also been listening to what people who work in the university sector say. The principal of Napier University just yesterday warned members of this Parliament that there are, and I quote, severe funding challenges facing the sector. Universities Scotland say that our universities see, and I quote them, this year's budget from the Scottish Government as a pivotal point in their future. Pivotal because, in their words, there has been a pattern of cuts to core budgets. An 11% cut in funding over 5 years. That's over £120 million less invested in Scotland's universities each year. That's a cut of £700 for each Scottish student every year. So Scotland's universities have a straightforward request. They want a 2% real terms increase in university teaching and research grants in next year's Scottish budget. So, First Minister, will you today meet that straightforward request? Will you invest in our universities, starting with that 2%, or will you continue to preside over their managed decline?
First Minister.
Well. Firstly, our universities are performing extremely well, and that's down to the experts who work in our universities, more top-class universities than almost any other country in the world. And on the widening access, there are figures out just today actually showing UCAS acceptances up again in terms of people going to university from the 20% most deprived areas. That's the fourth year in a row at this stage in the process where we've seen that kind of increase. But Richard Leonard has made a specific request today for a 2% real terms increase in funding for universities. So I will make my usual offer to him. As I keep reminding him, we allocate all of the Scottish Government budget every year. So it's fully allocated to our hospitals, to our schools, to other local government services, to universities, to colleges. If Richard Leonard wants a 2% increase for universities on top of the increases he calls for local government and everything else that we're responsible for, then bring forward where in the Scottish budget you think we should make the reductions. I've asked Richard Leonard to do this on countless occasions now. He hasn't once come forward with any ideas. So, maybe today will be different. The door is open, as always.
Richard Leonard.
But this is First Minister's questions, and I'm asking you questions about your record on higher education. And I didn't hear an answer to my question. So if the First Minister today won't promise to increase funds to Scotland's universities, will she at least promise to retain funds in Scotland's universities? £90 million currently funds tuition fees for European Union students. And our universities have asked for a simple promise that whatever happens regarding Brexit, and I am determined that we should remain, that whatever happens regarding Brexit, that the Scottish Government must promise to keep that £90 million invested in our universities.
Order.
No wonder they're concerned about that £90 million, because, First Minister, under your watch, we have witnessed funding decreasing, a system declining, all because your government is deprioritising higher education. So will the First Minister today end that failing policy, give our universities that guarantee they are looking for? Is that not the very least that our universities and our students deserve?
First Minister.
Well, just as an aside, Presiding Officer, I think we possibly just heard there Labour position on Brexit number 452. It is utterly bamboozling. Can I also say to Richard Leonard that I think that rambling, incoherent series of questions to me just demonstrate why he will never stand here answering First Minister's questions, because he has zero credibility. Now, can I point out to him that it is for Parliament to pass the budgets of this government? As we keep getting reminded, this is a minority government, so we have to win support from other parties to get our budget through. If Richard Leonard wants us to spend more on any particular area, then we have to spend less on another area. That is simple arithmetic. So if Richard Leonard wants to be taken seriously, not as a potential government, I think that is long gone as a lost cause. But if he wants to be taken seriously, even as an opposition, then he has to bring forward those proposals. I'm still waiting for him to bring forward anything with any credibility, and until he does, Labour and Richard Leonard will have zero credibility out there amongst the Scottish electorate.
Thank you. We've got a few constituency supplementaries. The first from Shona Robertson.
Can I ask the First Minister whether the Government has been made aware of Sport Direct's sudden decision to terminate Tesco's lease on its Dundee City Centre Metro store, its refusal to grant a short-term extension to help Tesco support affected staff, leading to the needless loss of 74 jobs? And can I ask the Government whether the Government has been in contact with the companies concerned regarding this worrying situation?
First Minister.
Well, I can confirm to Shona Robertson that the Business Minister, Jamie Hepburn, spoke with Tesco yesterday regarding the company's restructuring programme and also this specific situation in Dundee. I understand that the Tesco Metro store is due to close on the 2nd of November, which will, as Shona Robertson says, result in 74 job losses due to the landlord Sports Direct terminating the lease, despite Tesco's wish to continue trading. And I would ask Sports Direct obviously to reconsider that. The Minister has offered assistance to Tesco regarding this situation, and of course our PACE team as always stands ready to offer any support to staff facing redundancy. I am more than happy to ask Jamie Hepburn to discuss the matter further with Shona Robertson to make sure that the Government is doing all it possibly can to help.
Jackie Bailey.
The First Minister will be aware that the planning application by Flamingo Land to build at Loch Lomond National Park has been withdrawn. On that basis, can the First Minister advise whether the agreement with Scottish Enterprise is set aside, and will she support consideration of a community buyout?
First Minister.
I'm happy to come back to Jackie Bailey on the detail of that in terms of the situation with Scottish Enterprise. I'll ask the relevant Minister to respond. We will always consider proposals around community buyout. Of course, there is legislation now around community empowerment and community right to buy, so these are issues that should always be discussed and be considered carefully.
Lee MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Transport Scotland officials reportedly told a meeting in Shetland earlier this week that the Government can no longer guarantee that the new Northern Isles ferry contract will be in place by the end of October, as previously promised. Can the First Minister confirm if that's the case? Does she accept that further delay in letting this contract creates uncertainty and makes it impossible for many businesses in Orkney and Shetland to plan for the future? And will she therefore ensure that the Government sticks to the October deadline?
First Minister.
Well, I absolutely agree that it is very important to communities in both Orkney and Shetland that they have certainty around the future contract. The Government is very keen to be able to stick to that deadline, and we'll set out, hopefully very soon, the outcome of that process. As Liam MacArthur is aware, we have been involved in legal challenges. The European Commission also has a role to play here, so there have been certain processes that have had to conclude and will have to conclude before we can announce the next steps forward, but we want to be in a position to do that as soon as possible.
Question number 3, Patrick Harvey.
5 years ago, the First Minister and I were both disappointed at the referendum result, but we were willing to work with those who promised to strengthen devolution and give the Scottish Parliament legal permanence. Instead, we've seen the UK lurch from crisis to crisis. We've seen the promises about protecting our place in Europe broken. We've seen the people of Scotland ignored, especially the 200,000 young voters and counting who have never had a vote on their country's future. And we've seen the UK government treat devolution with utter contempt. Another referendum is coming. We all know that. Does the First Minister think that we can trust that the head of state won't once again be invited to interfere in a vote of the sovereign people?
First Minister.
Well, Scotland's future should always be a matter for the Scottish people. We know that support for independence is rising. Demand for another independence referendum is rising. And if you don't want to take my word for that, all I can do is quote polling expert John Curtis, who said yesterday that also becoming more difficult to sustain is the argument that Scotland does not want a second independence referendum. Scotland does have the right to choose our own future. I think the revelations, if I can call them that, from David Cameron today say more about him than they do about anybody else, and really demonstrate, I think, the panic that was in the heart of the UK government in the run-up to the independence referendum 5 years ago. Of course, that is nothing compared to the panic that is in the heart of the unionist parties now about independence. They are progressively, one by one, making themselves look utterly ridiculous. They are reduced to trying to block Scotland's democratic right to choose, or rig Scotland's democratic right to choose, and all because they know they do not have the arguments against independence, and they know that when Scotland is given the right to choose, Scotland this time will choose to become an independent country.
Patrick Harvey.
Those great many young people who have never had a vote on independence do deserve to have a say. And tomorrow, many thousands of them will be taking to the streets across Scotland, demanding an urgent response to the climate emergency. They know that Scotland can't hold its head up high next year as the UN climate conference comes to Glasgow if we're still committed to maximum oil and gas extraction. They know that we need system change, a new economic direction, a genuine Scottish Green New Deal, not a Tory-light economic plan written by people who still think fossil fuels offer a secure future. Will the First Minister give tomorrow's climate strikers the news they want, that Scotland is ready to end its reliance on the lethal fossil fuel industry?
First Minister.
Well, just finally on independence, you know, I've... OK, Presiding Officer. OK, Presiding Officer, I probably have to admit this is not finally from me on independence. I may mention it again some point in the future. But I'm struck by the barracking and the heckling of the unionist parties in this chamber. I suspect the louder they get, the more obvious it is how panicked they are. And the big question for them is this: If they are so confident that people in Scotland don't want independence, why are they running so scared of an independence referendum? And on the issue of climate change, firstly, say to Patrick Harvey, I had the pleasure of meeting the co-leader of the German Greens in Berlin yesterday, who was very positive about the leadership role of the Scottish Government on climate change. I am absolutely happy to look young people, and I pay tribute to them for the action that they are taking, in the eye and say that Scotland is and will continue to be a leader in the transition to a net zero economy. And in terms of oil and gas, it is part of that transition, but as we have discussed many times in the past, we've got to make that transition firstly in a way that is fair and just, and secondly in a way that actually reduces carbon emissions rather than perhaps in the short term inadvertently increasing them. So we will continue to show real leadership, not just within the UK, not just across Europe, but globally as we face up to and address the climate emergency.
Question number 4, Willie Rennie.
It's 1 year since this Parliament voted to scrap national tests for 5-year-olds. Since then, the Scottish Government has ordered tests for another 50,000 Primary 1 pupils. Why has the First Minister allowed that in the face of the clear vote of Scotland's Parliament?
First Minister.
Well, after that vote, of course, the Deputy First Minister set out the action we were taking to respond to it. An independent review of Primary 1 assessments was carried out. That report was published. We set out our response to that, the changes that we were going to make, and that is the right and proper way to have proceeded. I think that the assessments we have in place in our school are proportionate and right. Of course, they didn't introduce assessment for the first time. All local authorities previously carried out assessments, some more than once a year. This is part of the process of making sure we have the information that allows us to determine whether our education system is delivering for the young people it serves, and we will continue to take that action because, again, that's what we owe to young people across the country.
Willie Rennie.
So when Boris Johnson tramples over parliamentary democracy, the First Minister is outraged. When her Education Secretary does exactly the same, she pats him on the back. But isn't it just Parliament? Teachers are being snubbed too. In 400 pages of fresh criticism, teachers said the tests were a logistical nightmare, caused a lot of stress to pupils and were a waste of time. And that's on top of the government's own advisers who criticised the tests. So experts are against the tests. Teachers have spoken out against the tests. Parliament voted against the tests. I know he's not having a good day, but will the First Minister finally listen and tell John Swinney he's got to scrap the tests?
First Minister.
Parliament asked us to look at the evidence. That's what we did. We established the David Reedy review. He conducted a comprehensive independent review, speaking to many stakeholders, inviting written feedback from many. He spent considerable time in schools talking to teachers and children. He watched them undertake the assessments. It is absolute nonsense to suggest that David Reedy's report provided anything other than a clear recommendation that P1 assessments should continue. Research has shown that a majority of Primary 1 teachers believe the children in their classes had a positive experience overall. The review reported that there was scant evidence of children becoming upset that people like Willie Rennie had suggested. So we have taken the action to make sure that changes that were required are being made, but we will continue to take the action to ensure that we have the information, that teachers have the information about the performance of children so that they can help those children who need extra help and make sure that children are performing at the levels they should be. That's the right way to proceed, and we will continue to do so.
Thank you. We've got a few further supplementaries. Claire Adamson to be followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The First Minister will be aware of new research showing that there has been a 21.5% decrease in alcohol-related deaths in Glasgow since the introduction of minimum unit pricing. Does the First Minister agree with the British Liver Trust that parliaments across these islands should get on with the day job and follow Scotland's lead in this area?
First Minister.
Yes, I strongly agree with the British Liver Trust. I am very proud that this Parliament introduced minimum unit pricing. It is, of course, early days for that policy. There is a full review built into the legislation, but all of the early indications, including the statistic Claire Adamson has quoted from Glasgow, suggest that that policy is working, it is saving lives and it is improving health for people across the country. So I'm proud of it. I think this Parliament should be very proud of it, and while it's for other parliaments to make their own decisions, I would encourage other governments and other parliaments, not just across the UK, but across the rest of the world, to look at this policy and consider implementing it in their own countries.
Donald Cameron, to be followed by Polly McNeill.
Thank you. Has the First Minister ever used a private or party email address to conduct Scottish Government business?
Minister.
The government is completely subject to freedom of information legislation, and we would be covered by any of that. Most of the way rightly or wrongly I should say, most of the way I conduct government business is on paper. I receive paper boxes, not email boxes, and I do handwritten notes. That's how I conduct government business, and we will continue to respond to freedom of information requests about email correspondence on any particular issue.
Pauline McNeill to be followed by Ross Greer.
Thank you. The First Minister will be aware that MSPs and MPs from all parties have been expressing concern that ASDA are threatening their predominantly female workforce with the sack if they do not accept extremely detrimental terms and conditions. But of course, ASDA are not threatening their mainly male distribution workers this way. And this year, ASDA announced a 92 million jump in profit, bonuses all round for mostly male senior members of the Directors' Board. Can the First Minister join me in asking ASDA to get round the table with GMB Union and start treating women workers in its stores with some respect?
First Minister.
I do share the concerns. I know ASDA have responded to some of the MSPs who've raised these concerns. I am one of them. I have an ASDA store in my own constituency in Tory Glen. I've corresponded with ASDA on behalf of constituents about this, so I would encourage ASDA to continue to discuss these issues, to get around the table with staff and with unions, and hopefully to reach a positive resolution.
Ross Greer.
Thank you. Tomorrow, thousands of young people across Scotland will join millions more across the world in a historic climate strike. But many college students are concerned that if they take part, they'll lose their lifeline bursary due to strict attendance requirements. The National Union of Students haven't been able to get a straight answer from the Scottish Government or from Colleges Scotland. So could the First Minister today confirm that any college student who takes part in tomorrow's climate strike will not lose their bursary because of it?
First Minister.
Well, my view would be very clear that students who are engaged in legitimate peaceful protest should not lose their bursary for doing that. I'm more than happy to ask the Higher Education Minister to correspond with the member about the detail of those assurances so that students know that they can take part in these protests without those concerns.
Tom Arthur.
Parliament will be aware of new research showing that EU citizens feel safer and more welcome in Scotland than in other parts of the UK. Can the First Minister reiterate that her government will always stand up for the rights of EU nationals living in Scotland?
First Minister.
We will do everything we can to stand up for and protect the rights of EU nationals. While I was reassured to read the research earlier this week that suggests EU nationals in Scotland feel safer and more comfortable in Scotland than in other parts of the UK. I find it distressing that EU nationals in any part of the UK don't feel safe and comfortable, and I find it deeply distressing that EU nationals have had to put up with the uncertainty and the stress and the anxiety that they've suffered now for more than 3 years. I think it is utterly shameful and disgraceful, and it is in fact, in my view, one of the most shameful aspects of the whole Brexit fiasco. So I would again call on the UK Government to do everything it can to make sure that this anxiety for EU nationals stops, and that we continue to send the clearest possible message that we welcome people in our country, we want them to be here, we want them to stay, and we highly value the contribution that they make.
And Neil Findlay.
When unemployment goes down, it's because of Derek Mackay's genius. When it rises, it's now to do with him. When hospital projects degenerate into shambles, it's the fault of health boards or the Matrix, whatever on earth that is, but never the fault of Jane Freeman or any of her predecessors. Why is it that no one in this government ever accepts responsibility for the failure of any of their key policies?
First Minister.
Well, Neil Findlay talks, frankly, nonsense on that. This week, the Health Secretary has announced a statutory public inquiry into the situation at the Edinburgh Sick Kids to look at the issues around accountability, to look at the issues around the technical specifications and the construction standards, and I think that is the right and responsible way for a government to proceed. It was something that I thought Labour was calling for, which makes it more than a bit passing strange that they now seem to be objecting to it as well.
Question number 5, Stuart McMillan.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to alleviate the reported concerns regarding the number of police officers available to enforce a crackdown on drug driving.
First Minister.
Drug driving is completely unacceptable, and that is why we have given new powers to Police Scotland to keep our roads safe. These new laws, together with our stringent drink-drive limits, will ensure that we have the UK's most robust laws against impaired and unsafe driving. The deployment of officers and preparations for implementation are a matter for the Chief Constable. While all police officers can enforce legislation, including road traffic offences, I understand that extensive training of relevant officers is underway to ensure effective implementation.
Stuart McMillan.
I thank the First Minister for that reply, and I welcome the Scottish Government's zero-tolerance approach to drug driving, and as I previously raised this issue in the Chamber before. The drug detection kit that police officers will use at the roadside means doctors will no longer be required to attend and take a sample. So can the First Minister outline the benefits this new legislation will also bring to the NHS by freeing up doctors' time?
First Minister.
Well, I welcome Stuart McMillan's long-standing interest in this issue. It is true that the new offence doesn't require evidence of impairment, so that should free up time of doctors needing to consider impairment in police stations. Of course, some doctors might still be involved in taking blood samples. More generally, as I've said already, together with our drink driving limits, these new laws will ensure that we have the UK's most robust laws against impaired and unsafe driving, and I think that will contribute enormously to improving safety on our roads.
Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, I have a Freedom of Information response from Police Scotland from August relating to this drug driving legislation, which says an online learning package requiring completion by all operational officers of the rank of Inspector and below is in the process of compilation and will be available prior to introduction. So can the First Minister tell me, is this online learning package now available, and will all officers have completed it by 21st of October?
Well, training of officers is an operational matter for the Chief Constable. I've not seen the freedom of information that Liam Kerr is referring to. If he wants to write to me or to the Justice Secretary, we'll respond in more detail. But these are operational matters. As Parliament sets the law, as it has done around drug driving, and we expect our Chief Constable, acting independently of Parliament and of politicians, to make sure that the arrangements are in place. And I have every faith in the Chief Constable and Police Scotland to make sure that that is the case.
And David Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 9 years ago, 2 young constituents died as a result of drug driving. I've been a road safety campaigner since then and have consistently called for lower drug driving limits and drugalyser tests. The First Minister will know that police in England and Wales have had drugalysers for 4 years, and their drug driving conviction rates are significantly higher than Scotland. I welcome the new drug driving limits, but could I ask the First Minister why is this taken so long to implement?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, as Dave Stewart will appreciate, and I recognise his interest in this issue as well, we legislated first to reduce the drink drive limits. We now have the most stringent drink drive limits anywhere in the UK, and that's also an important part of road safety. The drug driving limits have not been straightforward. There are a significant number of drug types that are included, so careful consideration has been required. But I think it is now extremely positive that we have this new law in place, which is more stringent than anywhere in the UK and will ensure that we can have roads that are even safer than before, because Dave Stewart has referred to tragic cases in his own constituency. Many people will be aware of tragic cases of this nature, and anything we can do to reduce their incidence it is important that we do so. And I believe that the combination of the action we've taken on drink driving and drug driving will help to make our roads safer.
And question 6, Brian Whittle.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to tackle the stigma surrounding HIV.
First Minister.
We're providing third sector funding of over £2 million over 3 years to support innovative work in sexual health and blood-borne viruses. That includes funding for Waverley Care to engage directly with people affected to inform the development and delivery of targeted service that challenge stigma and promote prevention, testing and support. A person diagnosed with HIV in Scotland today can expect to live a full life with near normal life expectancy, and a person with sustained undetectable levels of HIV in their blood cannot transmit HIV to their sexual partners. We will continue to work to eradicate the stigma around the virus and tackle the false myths and prejudices that sadly still surround it.
Brian Whittle.
Can I thank the First Minister for that answer, in which he joined me in commending former Welsh rugby captain Gareth Thomas in his continuing personal journey to tackle stigma and prejudice around homophobia and his recent HIV diagnosis, and in doing so condemn his disgraceful treatment by certain elements of the press and public. Given Mr Thomas's experience, does the First Minister agree with HIV Scotland that in the era of treatments such as PrEP, that it is now time for a public health campaign to end HIV stigma?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, can I join Brian Whittle in paying tribute to Gareth Thomas? I think his brave and very emotional intervention this week will have done a great deal to address the stigma here, and many people across the whole of the UK and further afield have reason to owe him a great deal of gratitude for that, and I'm sure we all send him our very best wishes. I do agree that there is much more to be done to tackle stigma here. We've all got a part to play in this, and I would say very bluntly, I think the media have a part to play in this as well, in making sure that they are not disseminating the myths and the false impressions of HIV that we often do read through the media. I do think there is an argument for a campaign, particularly given the successful introduction of PrEP, and we will continue to consider what work we can do to ensure that we are consigning this horrible stigma that wrecks people's lives to the dustbin of history, and I'm sure that's something that all of us will come together to do.
Thank you very much, and that concludes First Minister's questions. We're going to move on shortly to members' business in the name of Shona Robertson on Social Security Scotland's first anniversary, but we'll just shortly suspend for a few moments to allow members and the gallery to clear. A short suspension. Thank you, colleagues. I think business can resume. Our next item is a members' business debate on motion 18758 in the name of Shona Robertson on Social Security Scotland's first anniversary. And the debate, as usual, will be put without any questions being put. I would encourage members who wish to contribute to press their buttons. And I call Shona Robertson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It's a privilege to bring this debate to Parliament today, and I'd like to start by thanking my colleagues here today from across the parties who have supported this motion, giving us the opportunity to mark Social Security Scotland's first anniversary, and I look forward to listening to their contributions and hope that they help shape the future of social security in Scotland as they have its beginning. It was a proud moment for me when this Parliament passed the Social Security Scotland Bill. It was a proud moment for us all, for all of us who want to see a fairer, more respectful and dignified Scotland. And of course, great credit must go to all those who campaigned for many years for control over our welfare policy. This is indeed a good start. Across the UK, Scotland is showing the way forward, implementing a system based on the principle that social security is a fundamental human right. This principle has helped shape the body, has helped shape its charter. At its inception, the people of Scotland were asked how these social security powers should be used, and the message that came back was the UK system is stressful, it's complicated, it's impersonal and even inhumane. We were determined to see things differently, to deliver benefits humanely, personally and positively, to see social security as a fundamental human right. We asked people from all different backgrounds to shape our principles, to share their experiences, to help us build a system with them at the centre. From this, the Charter was formed, stating that social security is an investment in the people of Scotland, that social security is itself a human right, essential to the realisation of other human rights, and respect for the dignity of individuals is to be at the heart of the Scottish social security system. Since its establishment, the agency has headquartered in Dundee, something that of course makes me extremely happy, bringing over 700 jobs to the city, well-paid and highly valued jobs in challenging economic times for the city. It's very welcome indeed. A further 750, of course, at its base in Glasgow, and a further 400 people located in communities across Scotland, delivering face-to-face support to those who need it. Its first year has been a success. Audit Scotland's recent review found that the Scottish Government has delivered on the commitments it made for the first year, establishing a new agency which paid the first Scottish benefits, developing a social security charter, forming the Scottish Commission on Social Security and undertaking important groundwork to support the delivery of future benefits and embedding new ways of working, supporting the phased delivery of the benefits, reflecting the principles of fairness, dignity and respect. The report also says that many challenges are still to be faced as more powers come to Scotland, and we don't doubt these challenges. But I don't think we fear them either. We see it as an opportunity to build a fairer future for all, and we'll build on what has already been done. Only yesterday, the Government announced the Job Start payment to support young people in a new job after a period of being unemployed. This comes on top of the Carers Allowance Supplement, which has helped over 77,000 people so far by providing payments of £35 million, in addition to the £157 million in carer allowance payments, on top of the 9,700 families supported through Best Start grants, and on top of the Scottish Child Payment, which will lift 30,000 Scottish children out of poverty, described as a game changer by anti-poverty campaigners. We see what has been done, and we can see what can be done, and we see what needs to be done. Because let's not forget the words of the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, who said, even while in Scotland they are frantically trying to devise ways to mitigate the worst features of the UK Government's benefits policy, UK Government compassion for those who are suffering has been replaced by a punitive, mean-spirited and often callous approach to welfare. He went on to say, Scotland has used new powers to establish a promising social security system, a promising start. I know that we can do much more. I echo Social Security Secretary Shirley-Ann Somerville when she said, and her calls for all social security to be devolved in Scotland. I think we've shown what we can do with that. What we want to do is to have the rest to support our people even more. We can create a system with the people of Scotland for the people of Scotland. The UN letter declares that that poverty is a political choice. Well, let's not choose poverty, let's choose to end poverty. Let's choose a system with the people of Scotland, for the people of Scotland. Thank you. I look forward to contributions. Thank you.
Thank you. And I call Michelle Ballantyne to be followed by Jenny Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It gives me great pleasure to open in this debate, and thank you, Shona Robertson, for bringing it forward. Marking the first anniversary of Scotland's Social Security Agency is important because it isn't often in this chamber that we find such a consensual issue, particularly not in recent weeks. But I think we can all remember the infectious optimism evident in Holyrood back in that April afternoon, when unanimously we passed the bill that enabled the creation of Social Security Scotland. It was the culmination of the largest devolution settlement since this Parliament opened, and the Social Security Act presented this Parliament with the opportunity to create something dynamic, exciting and new. As we've heard from Shona Robertson, and no doubt we will hear from the Cabinet Secretary later, David Wallace and the team at Social Security Scotland have done well to adapt to the challenges presented, both practically and at a policy level. Having visited the agency's offices in Dundee on a couple of occasions, I was very impressed with the enthusiasm with which the staff described their roles, as well as their desire to build a compassionate system tailored to Scotland's needs. I cannot fault them for the work they have done and will carry on doing, and I'd like to add my thanks today for all the work they have done to ensure the smooth delivery of the devolved benefits and the new ones that are being created. That said, it would also be foolish to rest on laurels just yet. What has been accomplished to date is absolutely an achievement, but a sense of perspective is required. The benefits that have been delivered by Social Security Scotland to date are just the tip of an iceberg, and it is of some concern that we are already seeing some delays. In June, the Cabinet Secretary announced a whole series of postponements. I'm glad to see that the funeral expense assistance promised in the summer has now arrived, albeit just a month late. The former Secretary of State, Amber Rudd, though, has warned of an impending cliff edge for disability benefits if the Scottish Government do not keep to their timetable, potentially affecting thousands of Scots each month when the DW assessment contracts expire in 2021. The importance of this date cannot be underestimated. With no mechanisms in place to provide disability assessments, there is a serious risk that the Scottish Government could be forced to guess eligibility, or worse, people may not receive benefits they are entitled to. The decision to bring the first instalments of the Scottish Child Payment forward threatens to disrupt these essential benefits. And while I welcome the Scottish Government's intention with this policy, I hope that they take the greatest of care to ensure that it does not affect the other benefits from the disability point of view that we absolutely need to deliver. Yes?
George Adam.
If it's quick.
I take on the members' attitudes with regards to disability benefits, but is it not hypocrisy coming from her, with her government in London have actually been attacking that very same community, and for her to come in here, or sorry, Presiding Officer, for the member to come in here and actually state that is an absolute disgrace.
Michelle Ballantyne.
Well, I think it's very sad of George Adam to suggest that it is disgrace to be concerned that people who are entitled to disability benefits may not get them if we don't meet the deadlines. I don't see that is in any way hypocrisy, and I think it's just, trying to have a political attack, which is inappropriate. There are some real concerns, and if you aren't able to take that on board, then, I think there is a problem. I actually think the Cabinet Secretary does take that on board, and I think she's actually working very hard to ensure that there isn't a cliff edge and that we don't miss those payments, but it is legitimate within this Parliament to express concerns. There are also a number of operational concerns that do need to be addressed. At the Public Audit Committee earlier this month, members did raise concerns about budgeting, staffing and capacity. Now, again, these are legitimate concerns. And you know, I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary is working hard to ensure they're addressed. The senior government official involved in the new social security system was, for example, unable to provide the committee with even a ballpark figure as to how the Scottish Child Payment will affect the programme's long-term financial planning. And there was also some confusion around whether or not the programme would stick to its own timetable, with the relevant Scottish Government Director telling the committee we are still working through the progress to understand whether we can hold to the dates that the Cabinet Secretary shared. So given those concerns around disability payments, I sincerely hope that this work is completed swiftly, and we are not faced with an autumn statement from the Cabinet Secretary detailing fresh delays to benefits that are already late. And I would have thought that George Adams would also want to make sure that that is the case. So just as a final point, I am hoping that the Cabinet Secretary will give us some information about what is to happen in terms of the ending of the lease of Dundee House, with, I understand, alternative premises yet to be identified. So given that we have got Wave 2 benefits coming, I hope we will be able to hear soon where the Social Security Agency is going to be located, because obviously they are going to face quite a lot of work with the new benefits coming and having to move. So I hope we can hear some information on that. But, you know, I am absolutely behind you in that I want you to get these things right, but I think it is legitimate for us to raise concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Malta. I call Jenny Mara to be followed by Bob Doris. Jenny Mara.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to begin by thanking Shona Robison for bringing this debate today. Given the scale of Social Security Scotland's work, any time we can devote to debating it is to be welcomed. I had the great pleasure, Presiding Officer, on Monday of visiting Funeral Link in Albert Street in Dundee. It's a recent initiative to address locally some of the concerns around funeral poverty, and it provides advice for people and ways that they can cut down the cost of funeral and still give their loved ones a dignified funeral and send-off. I would ask the Minister to note that, of course, the funeral payment, Scottish funeral payment, started this week. So, but also the project, which is doing some very good work, is facing funding challenges already, and I'd be very grateful if she might look at that. Audit Scotland report, as Shona Robison said, was very helpful recently, and it's important that this huge transfer of powers and public investment is very closely monitored to make sure that it is being done in the most efficient ways. And the Auditor General did highlight some issues around IT projects and the efficiency of those, and I'm sure the Minister has studied that report, but continuing scrutiny of the Parliament on the new agency and how it is being set up and the efficient use of public funds is very important. Of course, as Shona Robison said, the new Social Security Agency is headquartered in Dundee with the promise of 750 jobs, and I understand 250 already employed. And the new agency has had, of course, its successes. Those new benefits that have been delivered and are planned will be a welcome boost to struggling families, and if delivered properly, may allow us to finally start cutting into Scotland's appalling and shameful poverty figures, which are particularly marked in Dundee. But of course, like all agencies, it's also had its teething problems. The delivery of the government's new Scottish Child Payment has raised concerns due to fears that the application-based process will impact uptake of benefits compared to an automatic payment process, requiring more form filling for applicants who have already been through the universal credit process and creating more work for agency staff. This despite a previous Social Security Minister, Jean Freeman, demanding a simpler, more streamlined approach to benefits applications than was previously administered from the Westminster Government. The decision to delay the devolution of a host of benefits means that we have not yet been able to maximise the full potential of that process, and has left thousands of Scots still dealing with Department of Work and Pensions. But I hope that it is in the interests of an efficient transfer of powers and an effective transfer of powers that the Minister has delayed that process. I'd also like to raise the point, to note a similar point to Michelle Ballantyne, of the lack yet of a permanent base for the agency's headquarters. I think it's important for the headquarters of the agency to have a permanent house, but it's currently housed in Dundee City Council's headquarters, which is called Dundee House, and it's on an 18-month lease. Now, this lease is shortly going to come to an end. I asked the Chief Executive last week in the Audit Committee when that was. He wasn't sure when that was. But Dundee City Council are in the process of selling their headquarter building to a Canadian insurance company, I believe Canada Life, and then leasing it back from them. So I don't know if there are negotiations in the process at the moment, but I think it's really incumbent on the Minister today, as Michelle Ballantyne says, to give us an indication of when there will be a permanent base. Will they be moving out of Dundee House soon? There is a lot of empty office space in Dundee. There are whole buildings that are empty, perhaps requiring a bit of refurbishment that can certainly take 750 staff. So I think it's important for the future of the agency and its ability to plan its service delivery to get some clarity on that. I think I'll finish there. Thank you very much, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much, Ms Barra. I call Bob Doris to be followed by Alison Johnson. Bob Doris.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I start off, as others have done, thanking Sheriff Robinson for bringing this debate to Parliament here this afternoon. Can I also thank the team at Social Security Scotland, both the public-facing side of the operation at the front line, but also those behind the scenes who make a substantial effort in developing the systems, the IT systems and the structures underpin the entire Social Security Scotland system network. Another key thank you, of course, are those with lived experience of the benefit system who have been key and at the heart of development of the implementation and the rollout of a variety of benefits through their experience panels and various other extensive consultations. That lived experience is crucial, as are the key principles of how Social Security Scotland should conduct its business, as outlined in the Social Security Charter, which again those with lived experience helped create. Social Security Scotland have, as they should do, sought to build a strong and positive relationship with not just those claiming, but with potential claimants based in dignity, respect and trust. The new Scottish Social Security system is already in its infancy, making a significant difference to the lives of many of my constituents. The Carers Allowance Supplement has put an extra £452 into the hands of 83,000 carers each and every year going forward. Many of them will be constituents of mine. The Best Start grant has a number of payments: the pregnancy and baby payment, the early learning payment and the school age payment, and they've been rolled out incrementally over the last year. 42,000 payments have already been made to 10,000 low-income families, £13 million paid out to date. That will have benefited many constituents in my constituency of Maryhill and Springburn and beyond. And it's a more generous contribution to the previous UK benefit, comparing like-by-like families. Those in Scotland, I think with 2 children, would receive £1,900. That's actually £1,400 more than had they stayed elsewhere in the UK. So a more substantial contribution as well. This week, as we've heard, was the launch of the funeral assistance grants, which will have £1,300 on average, because there's no set amount, contributing to those in low incomes to, as Jenny Mara outlined, at a time when you shouldn't have to worry about money, such a distressing time, to make a really significant contribution to giving a fitting service to loved ones. I noticed in that application, which was very interesting as well, as I was promoting it in social media, that you could do a paper application, you could do an online application, but there was a telephone helpline you could call. So that idea that it's not digital by default, and that's a really important principle as well. And I also very much welcome the expectation of Job Start grants and payments up to £400 for young long-term unemployed to be paid around spring next year. So a lot to welcome, and that's all building up trust. And I haven't even mentioned the child payments, and I think it's right that low-income households are seeing that child payment of £10 per week accelerated. So the first delivery for under 6 will be in 2021. And that, of course, then brings us on to disability assistance that has been mentioned by a few people. Now, the key thing for me, and I have sought these assurances from the First Minister at the Conveners Group meeting and at the Programme for Government, is that the commitment to make sure that those who would undergo a new PIP or DLA assessment by the end of the lifetime of this Parliament will do so under the new Scottish disability systems and not under the flawed, dreadful UK punitive system. And those reassurances have been consistently given. Of course, that's a challenge, and we have to scrutinise it, but let's do that in a supportive, constructive way for that better Scottish social security system that we all want to see. I think my constituents would want me to finish by saying this is money they are entitled to. There should be a sufficiency of funds to deliver it. But by goodness, what more we could do if every social security benefit was devolved to this place, particularly the hideous universal credit, which causes my constituents so much misery. So thank you to Shirley Ann Somerville for her efforts in this, to Shirley Robertson for bringing this debate forward, but the team at Social Security Scotland for making a success of their first year. So happy birthday.
Thank you, Mr Doris. I call Alison Johnson to be followed by Jeremy Balfour. Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I too would like to thank Shona Robertson for giving us the opportunity to debate this afternoon. The transfer of responsibility over some areas of social security to the Scottish Parliament is a major milestone on Scotland's devolution journey. It gives us the opportunity to reclaim the idea that when we provide a good, reliable income for the most vulnerable people in society, everyone benefits. And we need that more than ever. We have a UK system that continues to treat some of the people who need its help in the most heartless way possible, despite years of being called out by academics, by organisations representing people who need support, and now even the United Nations. However dedicated and compassionate many of the public servants who run it are, it is a system that often appears to be tone deaf to the needs of our most vulnerable citizens. As many members across the Chamber will have experience of, my office has to help on a more and more regular basis people who are totally ground down by a system that simply doesn't seem to care what it puts people through. And that is the people who do ask for help. We know that some are so totally bewildered and just exhausted by the complexity of the system that they give up. Others drop out of the system altogether. This affects take-up. We know that there are many millions of pounds unclaimed. And as has been mentioned already, this is people's entitlement. So this is where Social Security Scotland is so very important. And I'm so grateful that we have this opportunity to debate the agency's work so far. One of the most important tasks that agency has is to build a new culture around social security, sweeping away that culture of suspicion of people who ask for help and instead encouraging and empowering them to apply for what they're entitled to. And when they do, they should get help from a system that understands the challenges that people face in applying for and getting support, and takes away so many of the barriers that have been put there by the DWP. I think Bob Doris was highlighting the challenges that the digital by default model has, and making clear that we have to have different mechanisms in place for people to get in touch, to get the help they need. These things can be much easier said than done. And Social Security Scotland will need to undo decades of denigration of the very idea of social security and of the people who need its help. Staffing the new system with people who have lived experience of social security is absolutely a good first step. And I'd be very interested to hear from the Cabinet Secretary on that point in particular. The motion is rightly very positive about the promise of social security and the progress it's made so far, but there'll always be room to improve. While the number of complaints about Best Start grant are low compared to the number of applications, I note that the research referred to in the motion shows that the majority of complaints that have been made about Best Start grant have been upheld. And while I accept that the Scottish Child Payment could well be a huge boost to some of our poorest families, it is means-tested and will face the challenge of take-up that almost all means-tested payments have, in terms of ensuring that people are aware of their entitlement and encouraged and supported to apply. Dignity and respect are rightly at the heart of the work of the new agency, but we can't have dignity and respect if we simply don't have enough money. The Scottish Government is absolutely right to top up carers' allowance, and it's great to see Best Start paying out more than double the Sure Start maternity grant. But we have to continue to monitor these increases. are they really good enough? The new rate for carers is still far below what they deserve, given the huge value of unpaid care, standing at over £10 billion a year. The real challenge, of course, will come when disability assistance for working age people becomes. It will replace PIP, which, according to Sheffield Hallam University research commissioned by the Social Security Committee, has taken an average of £2,600 from disabled Scots. Banning those unnecessary face-to-face assessments, a change in the law brought by Greens, will be an important part of that, as it should mean applicants get a fairer assessment of their needs. To close, Presiding Officer, Greens wish Social Security Scotland a happy first birthday and applaud the excellent work that has been done so far by the agency and its staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Johnson. I call Jeremy Balfour to be followed by the Cabinet Secretary. Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I also thank Shona Robson for bringing forward this debate, and was happy to support the motion, and also wish Scottish Security Agency a happy birthday. I think this first few years will be very important for the agency as it sets the ground rules as it is to go forward. And I think it is very important that we understand the role of the agency and the other roles other parties have to play within it. One of the things there was cross-party support for when the bill and now the Act became law was that people who make applications will be entitled to independent advice and assistance throughout the whole process. Now, clearly the agency can help, but I would be concerned if some of the rumours I am hearing is that the agency think that that will be their role, not a third party's role. And I would be grateful if the Cabinet Secretary would confirm that from the date of application through the whole process, an individual will be entitled to that independent advice, and it will not be the agency's role to do that. I do think George Adams' intervention was disappointing in that we, as a Parliament, do have to scrutinise what the new agency is doing and going to do. And there has been lots of good work, and I think we have to acknowledge that and say well done to the agency. But if we as parliamentarians are simply not going to scrutinise things that do go wrong or raise difficult questions, sorry, no, I don't have time, then I think that would be disappointing. I do think there are some issues that Audit Scotland raised, and again, I think we just need to make sure that we are going in the right direction. Like Alison Johnson, I do think it's important that those with lived experience and other minorities are working for the new agency. But again, from the figures that I have seen, we are below the percentage that the new agency has set itself. And I do hope that the Scottish Government will encourage the agency to keep going for that. And we as a Parliament have to make sure that those with lived experiences are given the appropriate opportunities. Again, the Audit Scotland report pointed out that even in this first year, there have been a high level of contractors that have come in. There's been a lot of temporary staff. We haven't met the number of people that was envisaged that would be working for the new agency at this stage. And again, we have to make sure that what is delivered is being delivered appropriately. Is the IT, is the cyber security absolutely right? I have to say I have been impressed by going up to the agency and by presentations that me and Bob Doris went to at Scottish Government to think they are on track. But it is the role of this Parliament to make sure that it is delivered. Best Start grant is welcomed, but I think that was in many ways one of the most simple benefits that has been taken over by the new agency. And again, I think there have to be some questions asked as why did those that were refused first time, so many of them on appeal, get it? What lessons have we learned from that? Because as we go forward with perhaps more complex benefits, we have to make sure that we are getting it right first time as often as possible. So I do think we welcome the new agency, we welcome, I think, its principles and openness, but often, as we say in this Parliament, actions speak louder than words, and I think we need to see what actions happen, not only in the past years, but happen in the next few years ahead. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Balfour. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary, Shirley-Ann Somerville, to wind up our debate.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm grateful to my colleague Shona Robinson for bringing this motion to the Chamber for debate today, and I think it's been another good opportunity to mark the many positive things that Scotland's new social security delivery agency has done in its first year. Before Social Security Scotland was even established, there were a lot of things said about the delivery of our new system, that it was going to be the single largest programme of work undertaken by any Scottish Government since devolution. The new agency would make more payments in a week than the entire Scottish Government had previously made in a year, and all of those things remain just as true a year after the launch of our new agency as they were before. The challenge is no smaller, the level of complexity is still as high and indeed is growing. But we have made good progress. In its 12 months, Social Security Scotland, ably supported by colleagues from the wider Social Security Directorate of the Scottish Government, have successfully launched the Carers Allowance Supplement, the Best Start grant family of 3 separate cash payments, and Best Start food scheme, and as recently as this week, of course, the new funeral support payment, 6 benefits in 12 months. This is on top of the underlying work completed by the programme and the agency around, for example, the Charter and the important groundwork for the future benefits that's already well in train. And of course, we go on with the launch of the Young Carer Grant in the autumn of this year. With cooperation of the UK Government, Job Start payments will be delivered in spring 2020. By next summer, we'll launch the first benefit in the Scottish Disability Benefit family. And by the end of 2020, the Scottish Child Payment, a game changer in the fight to end child poverty in Scotland, will begin. In early 2021, of course, we will move forward with our replacement to PIP. All of this is being done against the background of our continuing overarching effort to deliver a person-centred system, a system founded on our principles enshrined in the Social Security Act, passed, of course, unanimously by this Parliament, that reflects the commitments in our Social Security Charter, and as a number of members have quite rightly pointed out, is co-designed by people with lived experience of the UK system. And I, in particular, would like to take this opportunity once again, Presiding Officer, to thank everyone that's been involved in the experience panels, in our working groups. They have played such a large and important part in delivering what we have today, because it's fundamental that we have a system that has a belief that social security is a human right at its heart. But I'd now like to come to a number of the points which members raised during the debate. Can I begin with Michelle Ballantyne? Let's start on a point of consensus. I do recognise that she welcomed the enthusiasm of the staff and of the work that she's seen when she's visited the agency's headquarters, and I'm pleased that that was the impression she had. It certainly is every single time I go. Can I warn her gently, however, around the language that she's using around the Joint Ministerial Working Group and some of the quotes, very selective quotes that she quoted from the previous Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Amber Rudd, when she discussed a cliff edge because the DWP assessments will end at a particular date. The entire way that conversation went, as is shown in the minutes of that ministerial working group, was two governments recognising the time limitations that we are under to get a joint project, which is the devolution of social security to the Scottish Parliament, underway. And I may have had many disagreements with Amber Rudd on a number of issues on benefit strategy, particularly reserved benefits. But on that quote and in that meeting, it was an exceptionally constructive meeting. It's the way that she and I worked together in her time as Secretary of State, and I certainly look forward to that same constructive approach with the new Secretary of State for Work and Pensions. We are absolutely recognising, both within the Scottish Government, within the UK Government, everybody that's involved in this process, that there is of course a step change, just as Audit Scotland said, as we move towards Wave 2. We recognise absolutely that step change. We're well aware of the challenges ahead, and I'm confident that the work that the Government and the agency is putting together will stand us in good stead. Can I say absolutely and clearly today, the Scottish Child Payment does not threaten disability payments. The reason that when Aileen Campbell made her statement in June that she announced the changes in the timetable to certain disability payments was to ensure that we could deliver the Scottish Child Payment and ensure that we deliver the rest of the disability benefits, carers benefits, the case transfer and so on in a way that ensures we're doing it as fast as we can, but never losing sight of that safe and secure transition. And I hope that Michelle Ballantyne will take that reassurance today. I will, of course, update Parliament on the further work we've been doing on the Scottish Child Payment in due course. Can I turn now to Jenny Mara's contribution? I'm afraid I think the constituency organisation that she mentioned probably doesn't sit within my portfolio remit, but Aileen Campbell's. So I would invite her to write to my colleague to raise any concerns that they may have had on that. I don't think that one will be personally coming to me, but I'm sure Ms Campbell will return to Jenny Mara's points in detail. And it is very, very important that we look at the range of options that we could have had for Scottish Child Payment. The example was given around automation and whether that had been considered or the benefits that that could have had. There is undoubtedly benefits from automation. There's undoubtedly the reason why we looked at that as part of the discussions around the Scottish Child Payment, but it was determined that that wasn't the quickest way that we could deliver the payment, and it was important for us to move quickly on that. And I would refer Jenny Mara to the policy position paper that the government put out around the Scottish Child Payment, again around a June statement made by Aileen Campbell. Just moving on now to the discussion around the offices in Dundee, which I appreciate that some members have mentioned, particularly Jenny Mara. The Dundee House lease is an 18-month lease initially, but with a 6-month rolling lease beyond that. We are, of course, considering wider options and our permanent base due to commercial confidentiality. She will unfortunately get the same reply as she did from, I believe, David Wallace when he was at her committee last week, that I cannot go into detail of that, but I hope again I can reassure her that we are doing everything and the agency is doing everything to move that on as quickly as possible. Again, I can reconfirm. Certainly.
She'll forgive me if once we check the official report. I believe the Chief Executive didn't say it was down to commercial confidentiality. I think what he said, it was due to restrictions in the commercial property market in Dundee, which I don't share that perception. There is a lot of available office accommodation in the city. So a little bit further clarity from the Minister on that would be really welcome.
Cabinet Secretary.
Certainly. I think what the point I'm trying to make is that I can't go into the details of the work that we're doing around what permanent, what offices we're looking at and the work that we're doing to achieve that permanent office due to commercial confidentiality. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to go into the details of that, but I do recognise the point that Jenny Mara makes about the importance of making a quick decision, if at all possible, on that. There were a number of points, of course, raised by members, which I don't have time to get into detail today, but Alison Johnson is quite right to point around the recruitment culture that's required, and I'm pleased that the number of staff who have a disability or a long-term condition within social security, for example, is the same as the proportion within the wider Scottish public. I hope, again, that's a reassurance that we are moving forward with our recruitment in a very serious way to ensure that those with lived experience are part of the agency itself, and also that the agency reflects the wider Scottish society. In closing, Presiding Officer, I would like to pay tribute to the more than 400 staff of Social Security Scotland who, since the agency was established last year, have put money into the pockets and bank accounts of over 91,000 people across Scotland. Payments which, in a number of cases, they would not have got under predecessor schemes. All of this has been done with the support of the dedicated and hard-working staff within the Social Security programme. Their work has been absolutely critical in getting us to a point of having an agency with the systems there to deliver it. In conclusion, there is much I think we can be rightly proud of, both in this government, within this wider Scottish Parliament, and I hope in Scotland about what we have done within our first year of having a social security agency. Yes, we will have lessons to learn. Yes, there is much still to be done, but I believe we have set a very, very proud and firm foundation that you can indeed build a social security system with dignity, fairness and respect at its heart.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And with that, we conclude this debate, and I suspend Parliament until 2:30 this afternoon.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause. Well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.